Good evening, and welcome again to Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott, and tonight we'll be returning to a subject we visited before, and that is the subject of personal responsibility, and how all of us need to be responsible for our own actions and understand how that influences the outcomes of our lives. So our guest tonight is Glenn Barker. Glenn is the Executive Director of the Mankind Project Chicago. Glenn, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you for inviting me back, Kevin. Good to be here.
So first time you were here with us, I know we talked a little bit about the Mankind Project, but for those who didn't have the benefit of that particular episode, let's go back to the beginning and just a short description of what is the Mankind Project, the Mankind Project Center here in Chicago, and what is its purpose and how should men be thinking about it?
Okay. Well, the Mankind Project is a not-for-profit 501c3 that has 43 centers in the United States, and we're now on 5 continents. It was born out of a small group of men, as most organizations like these are, that wanted to provide something for men that was cathartic and they could explore their inner masculinity in a way that wasn't subject to ridicule or shaming. And then I hope to develop the mature masculine part of the man by letting it emerge through his own voice, through development of his own emotional intelligence. And that idea has grown now to be 50,000 men have gone through the program. 10,000 men are in circles every week, making a home for other men to visit. And quite proud of what we've been able to accomplish in the realm of helping men develop themselves into the best man they have or they would like to see for themselves.
Be all the man you can be.
You can be.
Yes. But
on your own terms.
Yes, and in a much different context from from being violent or one of the things that most struck me when you were here the first time was the discussion we had about how men who may be unhappy with a particular place that they find themselves in at any point in life, that for whatever reason, it's too much pressure, it's not a satisfying job, it's problems in relationships, whatever it might be, that every person, every man has played some role in that, and that although yes, there may be external circumstances that have contributed, nonetheless, there's always a role that the man himself has played in it, and so that is something that Mankind Project tries to get men to acknowledge and start to examine. And I thought that was a really central concept, and I'd like to have you talk a little bit about that.
Yes, thank you. It is the subject of personal responsibility. There's an integrity piece. Are we speaking the truth? Are we withholding? And are we making ourselves accountable for the impact and the consequences of our actions or inactions?
Or are men even paying attention to what those consequences might be?
Right, and that's part of the core focuses of truly the development from, we'll say, a boy that makes excuses to a man who takes responsibility, right, for his life. And to have an intense focus on that simple yet powerfully important influence of stepping into being a mature, responsible man in this world it is crucial, and it's ever present in the work that we do.
And I'd like to talk a little bit as well about the subject of maturity, because we use that word cavalierly, and a mature guy is a guy who can stand up for himself or can drive a fast car or whatever it is. There's lots of concepts of what it means to be mature, but in the context of the Mankind Project, how do you approach that?
Okay. I understand how the world or we can look at behaviors and say, that constitutes a mature man versus an immature man, but really it's about the inner construct of the man. Right? How he deals with the situations that he's in, and does he appear competent, confident, centered, right, and decisive in what he does, and is he taking responsibility for that? And those are the implicit messages, I think, that are received, and that's the harder part to articulate, and that's the area we're after.
So when you talk about finding your own voice, and we think about these concepts of maturity and personal responsibility, what does that voice sound like when you discover it?
Well, once it's discovered, I think it's perceived as the man is confident, the man is certain. I'd like to focus more on the development of that voice, I think is what's crucial. So if I can shift this to say, it's the developmental process of the emotional literacy and one man finding his own voice, then I think it's perceived as, there's a leader. There's a man we can follow. So the effect of that is what we're trying to back into to say, what are those core components that the man himself intrinsically owns? So that's not faked, that's real. And that becomes the real service and quality of the man's gift to the world. He's out of himself, and he's into gift giving and growing the rest of his world around him.
So those traits and characteristics that you're talking about, those are those unique to each individual, or are there commonalities? Are there certain traits that you can talk about, or that you can work with men to say, you know, here's a characteristic of all men that maybe you're not recognizing as well, or does it really all come from the individual?
I believe it stems from the individual, but the outgrowth is in appearance the same as far as how the reaction works in the world. So it is an outgrowth of the individual's character building, of his ability to be able to access and have this resource that he can reference back into, right? So when he's demonstrating his ability in the world, it's got this wonderful quality, right? So if that helps answer the question.
Yes, it does. And I also want to come back to the idea of leadership, because you mentioned that a moment ago. And we think of, you know, there's lots of seminars you can go to on leadership, and it's a hot topic in corporate circles and everywhere. And there's lots of different definitions of leadership. And the one that I think is most common is people think about generals leading the troops off to war, or corporate titans who lead their company to dominate the industry. But there are many other forms of leadership, are there not? And when you're talking about leadership, what does that look like in the context of Mankind Project?
Again, an outgrowth of a man has certainty. For instance, if he's a general, and the more certain he is, and the more convinced he is of his position, and how clear he is on his objective, it creates the charismatic quality of a leader, right? And I think that's a component. So we can, again, look at behaviors and back them into what gives that appearance in the world, and the effect in the world, not just the appearance. Yet that can also be driven out of we call it shadow behavior, that really is wanting to be important and significant. So what I look at leadership around are those qualities as well, because those are natural outgrowths. I look at generativity, right? If you're in the presence of this person, do you come back feeling enriched, and that somehow it's been a blessing to you, because around this particular person, I feel better about me. I feel like I have a little more growth to give. I have more room. I've been empowered by this person. So I back it into that. Do I feel that? Do I see that? Do I see the generativity? Are things growing around this person? It isn't about them. It's about the gift they can give to others to feel their empowerment.
Well, I think that I'm glad you mentioned that, the making people around you better. You know, you hear that actually a lot in sports, in team sports. The basketball point guard who makes everyone around him better. May not be the top scorer, but everybody on the team plays better when that point guard is passing the ball around and orchestrating the offense. So I think that's, if I understand, that's what you're talking about, is that leadership is not, oh, look at me, I'm big and powerful. It's not about me. True leadership is, it's about me helping you guys get better.
The corporate word for it you hear a lot is servant leadership. I mean, they're looking for servant leaders, those that are there to grow their employees, to growing the people around them. And there's always a quest for these kind of men. And I was having some conversations with some corporate boards about this, and saying that until we start rewarding that kind of behavior, these men won't show up through the corporate succession structure, because it's not rewarded and recognized. And that's part of our society too. The more we uphold these qualities and virtues in our boys and in our men, I think the more we'll see it come to the fore, because it's celebrated. This is what we want.
So where do you think in today's society, there are lots of different definitions of, as we said, of leadership and of those qualities. And you do see a certain line of thought that says the guys who are tough, you know, the not sissy men, you know, the guys who are willing to, you know, pound a little behind when it's called for. That this is seen as the masculine role model, and that's seen as leadership. And we see it sometimes in organizations where the organization is not doing well, but the leader might more accurately be called a despot rather than a true leader, right? So where does that come from? How have we gotten that different definition of leadership?
I don't know if it is that much different. It's about the depictions of leadership, and some of it's true. I mean, there are times when you need a general in there that'll go in and clean up a mess. Now, but you don't put the heron, as they say, in charge of the pond because he eats all the fish. So there's a time for men like Iacocca to come in and call all the shots, right, and be the alpha male, because that's what's required. But in the main, in the general, what's historically, I think, considered the great leaders and mentors of our time. You see the King Arthurs, and you see the Gandhis and such, and the Nelson Mandelas. These are inspiring people to be around, right? And it's that those that lives that they touch, they raise their own bar and have another expectation of their own lives, and that's for me a truer version of the. It's connected to something greater than themselves.
And I would think that if we had more of that level of leadership on a continual basis and throughout society, there might be less need for the General Pattons and the Lee Iacocca's to come in and clean up the ungodly mess, because it might not have gotten that bad in the first place.
We would hope. I don't know if that we would hope.
But okay, well, let's take that as an optimistic look at the future.
Right.
So something else we were talking about before the show that I think is really intriguing is the concept of the fatherless man. And I know recently you and some of your colleagues were on national TV talking about this issue and what it means to be fatherless and what those repercussions are for that. So what was that conversation about?
Well, there was the Oprah Winfrey Show it was about, and there's a woman, Jelanja Van Zant, who had this idea to she had a passion around the fatherless son. She saw that as something that needed to be talked about. And through a number of connections, I was introduced to the group at OWN to ask if we could access our group, if men would want to step up and be part of that audience. And so we did, and we were able to provide about 100, 250 men in their audience for a wonderful 1-hour taping that became 2 hours. And it become now one show became 2, became 3 airings of the show, and it'll be a follow-up. And the great part of that is I think they handled it in a very good way. The content, very good content. We believe the context in which men develop a healing for that is yet to be depicted in the world. But that we're also calling that's men's work. That's our job, to stand up as men and fill that hole. So the women wonderfully, and thank you, Oprah, for throwing down the gauntlet and saying, this is important. And I call to the men of our world to stand up and say, and I hear the call.
So what is?
And we pick up the sword.
What are the issues that that the fatherless men face? How does that manifest itself as you get to adulthood?
Well, fatherless men. Let me broaden the category. Not just fathers. We'll call it. Let me call that the absence or remoteness of the father. Whether there's an absence or remoteness of the father, that could be emotionally, physically, death, divorce, whatever cause. The absence of the remoteness of the father causes a hole to develop in the young man's soul, right? And as we say, that hole never fills with Hollywood Bambis. Right? It fills with demons, and much of it is about the distrust of men. The only interpretation to the man's only sense of his emotional language comes from women, which is inauthentic, which doesn't serve him as a man. And so this displacement and not being able to develop in the men's world, to the men's world, separating from mother to the men's world, has basically caused generations now of men, we feel, underdeveloped emotionally in their own masculine development, and then serving in the world as these leaders that like we talked about.
So let's talk about emotional development in men, because that's often seen as being a contradiction in terms, because men think they're above.
Worse than that, it's a joke.
Oh yeah, I'm above. I'm not emotional. I'm a guy. Hey, that's for women.
Or guys don't have feelings or whatever.
Guys don't have feelings, right? So how do you, in Mankind Project, how do you address that fundamental issue?
We call it out. I'll just put it this way, to say we actually call it out. I ask a man, does he have the, can he communicate his feelings? And can he do it in a courageous way?
And courageous meaning what?
Let me touch on this point rather than saying an emotional language that women have tried to teach us for years is one of being accessible, of being more nurturing, of being more vulnerable. I don't talk to men about being more vulnerable until I talk to them about being courageous enough to show their feelings. Will you step into a place of courage and tell us what is going on with you? Versus don't go weak on me and become vulnerable because you're scared, right?
Right.
Step into a place where you say, I will own this emotion of mine. I will find the language at my own pace, and therefore start developing that inner referencing, right? That doesn't have to be faked anymore about how I feel in order to stand my ground or hold my border, not that you stay away, so that actually I'm safer to be with. Because you can read me now. It isn't fake.
I think that's a fascinating concept because men are taught to be tough and to keep a stiff upper lip and to do that, make
It's a great facade, isn't it?
great facade, make sure that presentation is right. And it's interesting to hear the concept that says, or the interpretation that says, not only is that damaging to you, but it makes the other person distrustful because you recognize that I'm not seeing through to who you really are. Yeah. I'm seeing something you've constructed for me to see, and I don't know what's behind that. And is that
and we know this, don't we?
Yes, we've seen it.
We know,
right?
and we can feel it. There's a part of us that just knows that. So to develop that authenticity does take courage, and that takes risk. And many men are learned because of they feel inadequate in displaying that, and without, put it this way, without being judged by other men or ridiculed and shamed by women, they shut down. So you get this facade. So until a man learns that language and feels comfortable enough in a developmental part of him, right, by other men, right, to explore that, get his own language, start to own that, and then pull the borders back, say, okay, I'm not worried about being in this situation. They get stuck. And this is the piece we provide. Help the man to have that in that process, at his own rate, at his own time. So when he goes out in the world, I say having a little thicker skin but a bigger heart.
That's a good way to put it.
Right? Right.
Now, how many men come to this point, or let me rephrase that question. The people who come, the men who come in, is it because they're troubled, or do you get the captains of industry, or do you get the people who feel their lives have been at least outwardly successful, but who feel there's something missing? Are they part of the project as well?
Yeah, indeed, indeed. There's I would say broadly, two types of men in three categories of age groups. There's a man that says, I realize I need to bring something to my life where I need to move to the next step, my success. And I've taken courses of that to challenge my leadership, right? It's a wonderful place to be in, and a man has to have done enough significant work in order to come to terms to that. Many men need to be bumping into a crisis of some sort. They stand on two main, I call them platforms or bubbles, you know, a couple of primary relationships and their work. And if one of those collapses, the guy realizes he was really building a life on nothing. And now the man will seek to say, oh, my assumptions are wrong, my dreams are gone. My vision of where I was going to be as a man at 20, 30, or 40 is not coming, it's been a boyhood dream, it is not reality. So when a man starts to challenge his place in life as being a facade or a fake, is the time when there's a little opening for a man there.
Right.
This, you know, before it shuts,
yes,
right, before
time,
it shuts down again,
right.
to say, okay, and I reach out my hand and say, there are men here that understand that.
Who share that.
Who share that at this point in their life. Sit with us, explore if that's something that could enrich your life, help you grow as a man. Then get out there and make it happen again.
Well, and I can see that happening. So, for example, you hear about men who have spent their lives learning to be something, a lawyer, a doctor, or whatever it is, and attain it and get there and realize, I don't like this. It's not for me.
Yeah.
And so there would be perhaps the pinnacle of outward success. And yet still there's that hole you talk about, and it's not been filled.
You see it all the time in sports. I've excelled, and I've been a hero, right, in their lives, and all of a sudden their life has fallen apart, or they forgot about their wives. And this is the warrior part of men that's actually quite wonderful. But I submit again, if you're not surrounding yourself with men that can call out the blind spots for you, where this becomes admired, right, and men get rewarded for what they do.
Right.
And so the idea is to then keep down that path, because your needs are getting met by the rewards. But there's a cost to that when it's not balanced. To go back to the conversation with men that can call you out, we'll call it on the shadowy part of the behavior, that you're really just a driven, and you're leaving people behind, and and then because if that's not present for the men, you'll see that a lot. They run off. They just run right off the cliff.
Sometimes literally.
Well,
right?
yeah, literally. Yeah. Or their lives finally fall apart around them. Then they go, oh, I need this wake-up call. So I'm looking to try to prevent as much of that as possible by calling that out in the meantime.
Earlier, so
men.
that they can handle
Be
it.
aware, understand this. This is our propensity, men.
So
Throw a
let's
flag.
Recognize that we do this.
Right.
Right.
So I'm always throwing the flag for men. We're saying, if you're questioning, get in and let's see if we can do this responsibly and grow our leadership along with our success. Right? So it becomes generative. It's not self-serving. It doesn't wind up leaving people behind. Are you connecting some dots with all that?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So something else that you had mentioned earlier that I think is related to this that I really liked is the idea of the stories we tell ourselves. And are they true? And then how do we face that, decide, and how do we react to that? I think that's a fascinating concept, because we all have images of ourselves that are more or less connected with the way other people see us. Some close, some not so close. So talk a little bit about that, and what are these stories we tell ourselves, and how do you know if they're true?
Well, there's good stories, which are, hey, I'm capable, and I'm able to learn, and people like me, right? So I'd say keep those, right? Those that seem to be serving us well. But then there's stories that we make up that have, because of the impacts, things that happen in our lives. And I think in lieu of having, I'll say if you're a young person, something impacts your life, separation from a father, a death, right? In lieu of having adult references for coping, the child makes up a story. And that story is wonderful, because the story allows you to survive.
So what would be an example? What kind of story might that be?
Somebody dies, right? I have to be the man of the family now.
Even if you're 8 years old.
You're 6 years old, 8
Right,
years old.
right.
I'm now the man of the family. I can do that. And then the story develops, maybe you can't feel your feelings, right? So what happens, part shuts down and part tries to cope, and the story serves. It serves, okay, well, I can't fall apart. I got to be the man of the family. Okay, well, then I'm not going to let these people down. I'm going to, let's go be a captain of industry, one of your phases, right?
Yes.
That's great until it no longer serves the man, right? So many men will take this story all the way to their grave, because until they can realize that the story isn't operating as an adult. And we'll see this in men 2 or 3 times in their lives when it really comes to fore. When they hit about 30, and they hit by 35, they really get that story isn't working. It's not quite dawning yet, but the story's not working anymore. 45 again, and maybe in their 50s again, they hit where it's almost crisis time. That's the middle age crisis, which means I've been pretending all these years, kind of thing. So that's where the story it serves for a time, and then it needs to be a time when you get a new story.
So how do you?
And forgiving yourself for believing the other story when it started not to serve you anymore.
Well, that's important. That the story had a purpose, and
It
so
kept you alive. Good. It was great for a while.
but it's no longer applicable.
Is it really applicable to a 35-year-old man that says, I've got to be I can't feel my feelings. I can't. I've got to take care of everybody.
No, it probably wasn't true at 8 or 10 either, but it may have, as you said,
It
gotten them through
I got them through the
that
time.
tough period.
And these are the secret little stories. I think Alcoholics Anonymous says we're as sick as our secrets. But these are withholds, and these are stories, and things that are, once a man slows down enough to do some emotional work, right, and question these things, why is my behavior this way? Why do I keep on moving on and not paying attention? Whatever it is, symptomatically, many times there's a story.
And
A belief system that went with that says, well, because that's the best thing to do. You're not rotten. It seems like the best thing to do. But the story is driving the bus of a little boy instead of the adult getting in the front seat and saying, I understand that, and I'll take care of you now.
And so I would think from what you've described that the story most often manifests itself through behaviors that aren't working, right? And the behaviors may repeat, and they still don't work, and that's what brings this to
Well, they work in
fore.
part because they get rewarded, because usually
Yeah.
it's driving something that does help, but there's a conflict in the person. It's causing dilemmas in their lives.
And that's what I'm asking about, is that how is that recognition made that, gee, I've been telling myself this story for a long time, and it may not be true.
Yeah. Well, and who would I be without that story as a whole identity piece? We can, we can
Right.
maybe go into that a little bit, but to try to answer your question, I got off on that dilemma piece. It's when it causes a dilemma. So if you yourself are feeling like, okay, I'm operating in the world, I'm dealing with all this, but something is still not right, my relationships patterns are still not working right, these things keep on popping their head up, that's the first flag, that's the little call that we talked about before that says, something's not right here, and it's causing a dilemma. Well, you can probably back that into story.
And so for the men who are wondering, because we have about a minute and a half left, so I know it's always a shock, isn't it? Right. So for the men who are watching this, who are wondering, what would be the first step in about 30 seconds? What would you tell them that they need to do?
Examine your lives, men. If truthfully you know that there are things that you're not expressing, that you're not living your life into the fullness, you have a sense that your life is not going to turn out to be as fulfilling as you've wanted it to be, step into a place where it allows you to reflect. Either it's the Mankind Project or another, and truly examine the truth without the shame and the judgment, if you can, about examining your life and then taking that next step forward.
And on that perfect note, we're out of time. Glenn, thank you so much for being here again. We'll invite you back in the future. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Kevin.
And thank you for joining us once again on Public Perspective. You've been listening to Glenn Barker, the Mankind Project in Chicago. So until next time, you can see us every Saturday night on Comcast Channel 19, and you can find us at 8 o'clock. You can also see us on the web at publicperspective.tv. So until next time, thank you and good night.